Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Tonight, we'd like to discuss the issue of corruption and bad governance. I think in Zimbabwe, we have got a combination of both. And the biggest challenge, of course, is how to get out of it. We'll just quickly listen to this video clip where somebody is describing what corruption means to them.
Vile disease that sucks and drains the health out of something good. Corruption in society is an evil moral infection that keeps community in a state of perpetual sickness. Corruption is a moral virus. It's so potent it leaves its host sick, lethargic, and unable to realize and accomplish all that a well person can. Where corruption thrives, poverty and not prosperity thrives. Wealth is grabbed into the greedy, grubby hands of those who get fat on the toil and labor of good people. Corruption benefits, only temporarily, those who participate in it. Everyone else is a victim of the theft, the deceit, the dishonesty, and the lies that corruption feeds on. You need to know that a corrupt person is stealing from you. Corruption is filthy work and despicable acts of treachery done under the table and behind closed doors. Corruption is a disgusting shame. Corruption keeps a nation back from true development and from progress. Wise investors steer clear of a corrupt environment. They would rather put their resources into a place where the playing field of opportunity is equal for all and not bent towards feeding the financial lust of corrupt, lying, cheating, thieving politicians and government officials. How many wonderful development projects have been lost because the investors didn't want to do business in a swamp of evil? When those great projects go to another nation or to some other place, we all lose. Believe me when I tell you that corruption steals from you, it steals from all of us. Corruption plunders the nation's wealth. Corrupt people compromise on truth, equity, and fairness, choosing instead to feed off the short-term benefits of crookedness, exploitation, and financial perversion. Corruption is not just a personal matter. It's a culture. It's a way of life, not just for individual people, but for companies, communities, governments, and nations. Corrupt nations, hiding behind large companies, will seek to invest in other weak nations in order to take over the assets of the nation that they've invested into. They will provide financial loans to a nation for the much needed infrastructure, and they will do it with assets that they provide. They will sign contracts by lining the pockets of rotten government officials who participate in this kind of corruption and are then held hostage by their own deceit and greed. Corruption is nothing less than a form of theft and national robbery. A corrupt person steals from everyone in society. We all lose when corruption is rampant. Those who participate in corruption have chosen evil over good, lies over truth, and personal gain over well-being of all. To be corrupt means to be rotten. When meat is corrupt, it's rotten, and it stinks. Rotten meat can't be eaten. When a person is corrupt, he's rotten and unfit for a place in the community. A corrupt person should be jailed in order to protect society from the vile deeds of the corrupt person. Government should be protecting us from the foul results of corruption instead of being the proponents and participants in corruption. When corruption is systemic, when it's a culture and a way of life, when corruption thrives, it destroys the health of the community and nation. Now let me tell you something. Defeating corruption is a very difficult thing. The love of money is the root of all evil, the Bible says. People who love money will do almost anything to get it. Those who choose to stand up against corruption, you need to know that we're going to be involved in a war. We will be threatened, vilified, intimidated, marginalized, and ridiculed. These kind of people who stand up against corruption will often feel alone, as if they are the problem instead of the solution. Corruption can only be defeated when enough people have had enough and decide to do something about it.
And what do you
Corruption is
think?
a vile disease.
Corruption is a disease. Ben, what do you think?
Good day to you and good day to everybody. It's true. I would liken it to a veiled fire. You know, it burns everything in its wake. It's very difficult to stop once it gets the momentum. The momentum going, and this is evident in our country, particularly Zimbabwe. Corruption has gained so much momentum, and what worries me the most is that it's become a day-to-day thing. That is what we wake up to go and do. That is what we come back having done. We've even given it a name. To some say kungwava. you know that is corruption. That's how it goes, and then eventually it's part and parcel of your society, like what this gentleman has said. And this is evident. We are living in this you know world of corruption, especially in Zimbabwe. It's really sad, really sad, and it is vile.
Yes, indeed. I think one of the reasons why corruption has taken such a stronghold in Zimbabwe is that there are no institutions to deal with the problem. Our political system is so weak. Those in positions of power and authority enjoy absolute power. And that is the root cause. When those in positions of power and authority are the godfathers of corruption, who is there to stop them then? Nobody. That is the problem. And that is at the root cause of why corruption has become so rampant in Zimbabwe and why it is so difficult to uproot it.
I mean, we have a situation. You were talking about institutions that are supposed to be there to curb corruption. Now you find out that these are the most corrupt, they themselves. I mean, I don't have to go for name them all, but I will just talk of our police. They're supposed to be arresting the criminals that are involved in this corrupt exercise and everything. They are the most corrupt within Zimbabwe. They take bribes. Why? Because we could give them the leniency to say because they are ill paid. They are not being taken care of by government the way any worker should be getting compensated and having all the other benefits that come from working. They are not, but still, that is not a reason for them to exercise, in corruption. I'll give you another example. We have the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, which is we started operating, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 2014, and up to this day, they have not made an arrest, and yet Zimbabwe is one of the most corrupt countries. That just tells you, if you cannot arrest, it's either you are also corrupt. That's a simple explanation to it. And like what this gentleman said, once the momentum starts going, it's difficult to stop it. Now, if somebody says to somebody that is corrupt, hey, stop this, you are being corrupt, I'll tell you, no, 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 no. You are jealous because you're not connected. They justify it as being, connected. Which to me, if we have reached that end of it becomes very, very difficult. And it's a war. It will be a war. And, somebody has to take the fight.
Well, one of the things that maybe we should cover in this discussion is how did we get here? Here is Dr. Simba Makoni explaining how corruption in Zimbabwe started soon after independence.
I recall very clearly that when we came into office in 1980, we inherited Ian Smith's systems. And Ian Smith's ministers drove Peugeot 504s. They drove themselves from home to work in their Land Rovers and all in kinds. Most of them were farmers. They parked their Land Rover and then they used the government vehicle when they were at work with a chauffeur. When they finished at night, they packed them and they took theirs to go home. Within the month of our coming into office, Prime Minister Mugabe then directed that every minister be issued with an E-Class Mercedes-Benz. And the Peugeot 504s were retired to permanent secretaries, and the deputy ministers then took over. We can also look at many other things, small they may appear at the time. Let me hazard that even at that point, Enos Nkala was our Minister of Finance. I don't think we knew what budget we inherited from Ian Smith when the decision was taken to buy those E-Class fleets for the ministers. So the material affection for material things has always been with us. And the differentiation also, even going back into the camps, zve mashefu nezve macomrades makada were not the same. So much so that even today, when the so-called Minister for Presidential Affairs or Provincial Governor, as they were, goes to Bubi or Binga, they will be served separately and differently from the other people. The avarice grew as we began to exploit the opportunities of office. When I was in the government, the minister was allocated one vehicle that they kept, which was the sedan they used in town. If you needed to go off-road, then your ministry hired off-road vehicles from the CMED, and you were charged for it. Now a minister will have an average of 4 vehicles in his forecourt, all at government's expense.
So the leadership modeled the wrong kind of behavior, and that kind of behavior permeated all across our society. Our CEOs, like you're saying, heads of parastatals and so forth, modeled from the top.
Indeed. Indeed. I made a passing reference that we have CEOs who will buy themselves a luxury car when they can't pay wages at the end of the week or end of the month. This has been so entrenched in our psyche, this showing off, as if you are a different person. You're breathing different air from those who don't drive Prados and Land Cruisers, from those who don't drive Jeep Cherokees. We have lost our humanity. there's lots of reference to Ubuntu, very farcical, superficial, not coming from the heart. We have changed. We have changed because of our appetite for power. And we have changed because of our avarice for material things.
I'll stop it there. I think he's being bluntly honest. The level of corruption in Zimbabwe has reached unbelievable levels. And one of the main reasons why that is so is because those at the top have corrupted everything. Earlier on, we were referring to the police, the judiciary, the army. Everybody has been bribed so that the institutions that are supposed to be the check and balances of absolute power have all been co-opted into the system. Everything is ZANU-PF now in all but name. In the cartoon on the screen is Emerson Mnangagwa. This was in November 2022. He wanted the MPs to buy their silence. And he started by giving them 40,000 housing loan, US dollars. They took it, the MPs and senators, deputy ministers received 230,000 US dollars housing loans. It was called housing loan. Everybody knew they did not have to repay it. And the ministers themselves, 500,000. Mnangagwa was buying their silence. What was to follow in the 2023 election is one of the most reckless spending in Zimbabwe's election history. Mnangagwa must have spent at least 5 billion US dollars in bribes, from buying chicken and chips for the many hundreds of povo who were passed from one rally to the other, to buying chiefs' cars, church leaders' cars, judges received 400,000 US dollars housing loan just weeks before the nomination day. Of course, it was a bribe. And this is a country in which most of our health and basic education have all but collapsed. And yet the government was spending so much. So corruption has become so endemic in Zimbabwe that it is now part and parcel of it. And the opposition opposition in name, but like somebody once called them, they are ZANU-PF B team playing for ZANU-PF A team to win so that they could get their reward. This is the tragedy in Zimbabwe. When power has been concentrated in the hands of the corrupt, how do you break that stranglehold? This is the nightmare that we are facing in Zimbabwe. because the corrupt are using the vast resources of the nation's wealth, selling the nation's silver for a song to bankroll their stay in power. They are the godfathers of corruption. I think this is the biggest challenge that Zimbabweans must face, and solving it is not going to be easy.
I was just reading a story where Mtulingwe, the finance minister, was called before a committee in parliament and was asked about the 230 or so cars, that he bought for chiefs. And, the total expenditure for those were between 17 to 18 million US dollars recently. And when he was asked to say, before the elections, you bought them cars, and after elections, you bought them more cars. Why did you do it? He says, it's they need to travel between their constituencies. That was the reason. And where did you get the money? He says, we got it, because we had excess that was not allocated. And then, the question comes to say, Zimbabwe has got excess that they can spend 18 million, and they cannot, supply drugs in Parenyatwa that needs 80,000 US dollars to for to restock their pharmacy. They cannot buy drought relief, and they have to beg to say, please fund us, this money. So the question now is, what are you talking about when you are saying there is reserves? When you cannot do the essentials for your own people? That is, for me, another clear definition of corruption. ZANU-PF started on the wrong foot, like what Simbama Koni said. They started bribing certain individuals that held key decisions or, key positions within ZANU-PF to keep them loyal, to keep them, close, and to keep them quiet. And after that, this was during Mugabe's era, it has not stopped with Mnangagwa. He has just carried on the process of, what Mugabe used to do. And I'm guessing whoever is going to come in will probably be doing the same thing again. So, like what, the first gentleman said, it's difficult then now to start wanting to control corruption, because now it is engraved in our day-to-day habits, in our day-to-day transactions. We just have to be corrupt. This is very dangerous. This is vile, and it needs to be stopped. Who is going to stop it? We know that, like you were saying, our opposition has but joined in the ride. They are in it also for the same exact purpose. How much can they get for themselves? How much can they drain from whatever Zimbabwe has left in its coffers? Which leaves now for us to now search for new competent people who are willing to tackle this, this problem. Men and women with integrity, who have desire to see their country flourish again. Zimbabwe at one point had the most sophisticated economy in Africa after South Africa. That is where we were. We were, Mr. Mkori always says Zimbabwe was supposed to be the next Singapore. It was, destined to be the next Singapore. And now we are a basket case. That has to be changed. And it starts by finding men and women with integrity. The current crop is all but rotten. We might as well throw it away. Thank you.
My concluding remark will be corruption, we cannot end corruption because those in positions of power to create the institutions necessary to end corruption are themselves the godfathers of corruption. ZANU-PF will never reform itself out of office. That's point number one. Point number two, the opposition, the MDC, Triple C, have been on the political stage for 24 years, including the 5 in the GNU. They had the opportunity to implement reforms. They failed to implement even one reform. As we can see in the cartoon there, Mnangagwa is sitting with a snug grin on his face because he knows he has got the opposition under control. So what can be done? In my view, what needs to be done here is not so much the street protests, as some people have argued, but for the ordinary people to realize that as long as ZANU-PF rigs the elections and the opposition participate, con the people to participate in numbers. Last year, 2 million Zimbabweans participated and voted for Chamisa alone. ZANU-PF knows that they will stay in power until donkeys have horns. The solution is to stop the naive and gullible opposition members from participating in these flawed elections to give the process legitimacy. I am of the opinion, although SADC has not said so, but I firmly believe that SADC and the AU, while they condemned last year's election as flawed and illegal, they would have gone one step further and denied ZANU-PF political legitimacy if the opposition had not participated in those flawed elections. If they had not conned the ordinary Zimbabwean to participate in the flawed elections. So in conclusion, while we have got to fight corruption, while it is true that corruption has destroyed everything in our hope of a prosperous nation, we have got to realize that we will not tackle corruption by going after corruption itself. Because those in the position of power and authority to do so are the godfathers of corruption. So the best way is to wrestle political power from ZANU-PF. And at the present moment, the best way to do so is during elections. 2028 is round the corner. 2028, ZANU-PF will participate, will hold those elections under the present conditions without a single reform implemented. And I can rest assure you, the opposition will participate because they've got their eyes On the few gravy train seats, they know the regime is dangling before them. Our challenge as ordinary Zimbabweans is to make sure that the 2 million or so brain dead opposition supporters do not participate in those flawed elections. Because if they do, they'll give the process credibility and the results legitimacy, which is what I've been trying to show at the bottom of your screen there. That is a direct quotation from David Coulthard's book. He was referring to the 2013 elections. He has been participating in these flawed elections out of greed. This is the message that we've got to send to all those MDC, CCC supporters. They must understand that participating in flawed election will only serve to perpetuate the dictatorship, perpetuate the nation's suffering, perpetuate corruption. Thank you very much, Ben, and thank you very much, the listeners who were able to join us tonight. Have a good night.